Good afternoon. Small to medium defense contractors have a great many questions on their minds on how to address cybersecurity threats and compliance regulations ranging from existing DFARS to upcoming CMMC. Some pressing questions on their minds are, can I get a simple understanding of the most important federal regulations that apply to me? When do I need to act to meet these compliance regulations? And how to intersect cybersecurity and compliance, how to address it. To provide valuable insights to an SMB contractor, we're joined here today by Robert Metzger. Bob is a shareholder, AKA a partner at Rogers Joseph O'Donnell, where he's co-chair of the firm's cybersecurity and privacy practice. Bob specializes in government contracts, security, and compliance matters, and is widely recognized as one of the nation's very top lawyers for these areas. We will ask Bob to demystify compliance and explain in simple terms the most important cyber and compliance areas that SMB contractors should take notice of. Welcome, Bob.
Thank you. I'll start by saying, Sanjeev, that like you, I share concerns about how much the small and medium business community knows or understands about cyber compliance. And I've been trying hard to come up with strategies for companies who are important to the defense industrial base, both to protect themselves against cyber threats and also to be in compliance with today's regulations and the assessment process that we expect to come.
Well, Bob, we know you're very active in this area. In today's conversation, we'll mostly focus on giving a simple understanding of the regulations to the SMB. And we hope to get in touch with you at another time to provide some pragmatic solutions as well. So I'm going to ask a series of just 10 questions, which we believe are top of mind on the minds of our SMB contractors. So the very first one is, are defense contractors required to meet the 110 controls of NIST 800-171 as part of their existing DFARS clauses in their contracts? And this, of course, is for those contractors that handle CUI.
Right. Well, the answer is yes. There's quite a long history here, so this obligation isn't new. The present 7012 DFARS clause requires that companies have adequate security and measures adequate security by the 110 individually specified requirements in a NIST publication, SP 800-171. A171 itself was first produced in 2015. The first version of the DFARS clause that required use and satisfaction of these requirements appeared in 2017. CMMC 1.0 was released in 2020. There's a long history of many requirements imposed on a very large number of contracts that expect companies of all sizes who have CUI, except pure COT suppliers, to have adequate security employing the 110 requirements of the 171 special publication.
So Bob, could you specifically speak to some of the changes that occurred along with CMMC, particularly DFARS 7019, 20, and 21 interim rules that went into effect and which are expected to become final in 2022? What are the key provisions of the DFARS requirements in these regulations?
Sure. So 7012 was a fairly ambitious regulation, but it relied entirely upon self-attestation by contractors. Essentially, companies who took a contract that had the clause were representing by their accepting the contract that they would do the various things to comply with the clause and satisfy the cybersecurity requirements. Well, in 2020, I think December 1st, we had some new regulations issued in CMMC 1.0. The 7019 and 7020 clauses are quite important because they require companies to have a system security plan, and on the basis of that plan, to conduct a self-assessment, and then to do that self-assessment using a DoD-specified methodology. And then when that assessment is done, every company is required to make a submission of its score in the DoD Supplier Performance Review System, or SPRS. Not only do you have to post your score, you also have to inform DoD when you expect to close any gaps that you found in your self-assessment.
And Bob, as we understand it, that the 2020 versions of these regulations, 7019 and 7020, further required executive sign-off. So the DoD upped the ante and said, not only do you have to create an SSP and create your SPRS score, but you have a company executive sign off on your self-assessment.
Well, I'd put it slightly differently. When there is a requirement that you advise the Department of Defense on your compliance with a contract clause, by the fact that you are submitting a response, the company as itself is making a representation. And the leadership of companies, of course, can bear responsibility should that representation be false. In fact, in the event of investigations as to compliance or inquiry that might follow a cyber event, the investigators are going to start by looking at the leadership, and they may want to hear what lower level people think, but ultimately the leadership is on the hook. Now, in the 2.0 version of CMMC, which is in the works, there is expected to be a formal annual affirmation that is required specifically by senior executive leadership. This is a distinction that makes it more clear the nature of the responsibilities of the person to make the affirmation, and it increases the weight of the affirmation itself. But no one should think for a moment that submitting a knowingly false or misleading score to SPRS is something that can be done without exposure to adverse legal or contractual consequences. It's a hazardous decision to make, in my judgment.
Bob, you mentioned that DFARS has a long history starting from 2017. And many in this small to medium defense contractor base interpret that things go slowly. And so therefore, try to weigh that when they determine when they need to implement NIST 800-171, the 110 controls. So could you kindly share with us, your thinking on some of the implications that an SMB contractor needs to consider on determining the timing of when they should be implementing NIST 800-171 under their existing DFARS contract obligations?
Sure. I understand that it can seem daunting to comply with 7012 and to meet the 110 requirements, but there are many good reasons to work towards that immediately and not to delay your efforts. The first and most important reason is to protect your enterprise. And the protection is not just a matter of compliance with the DFARS regulation. The reason that the regulation is in place is because there is a long history of adversaries and hostile actors plundering valuable intellectual property and government information from all levels of the supply chain. There is nothing that has happened since the first version of the DFARS in 2017 that has shown that the threat is abated. It is not, it is worse. Moreover, since 2017, we've seen the increasing proliferation of ransomware attacks. And almost always, a ransomware attack will involve an effort either to deny you access to the information on your information systems. It all too often involves criminal stealing and encrypting information, which can be CUI information of the government. And so if you do nothing to protect yourself, you are exposed to a ransomware attack. Criminals are indiscriminate. They like lower tier participants in the supply chain because often they're less well defended. The costs and consequences of a ransomware attack include the potential inability to perform your government contracts. And if a ransomware is successful in compromising the confidentiality of government information, you're going to have to file an incident report. And honestly, you would not want to be in a situation where you suffer a ransomware attack, had to report it, then were subject to a DoD impact inquiry, and it were then to become known that you had no system security plan and that you had done nothing to comply with requirements.
I think this topic is something that you've educated us on and bears further discussion, which is that you're saying that if a commercial ransomware attack occurs, its implications for a defense contractor are much more serious than just dealing with the ransomware attack. Specifically, the DoD could very well ask you for an incident report. You'll have to file that report. And suddenly the DFARS regulations that are already in existence for you come into place because you've got to show the DoD that you're in compliance with those regulations. Could you clarify that
Sure.
and make sure that I'm speaking?
So, there's always been a couple of sides to the 7012 regulation. All too often, we're focusing upon the measures we're supposed to take to protect ourselves and protect CUI. But the other side of the regulation is the importance, the necessity of an incident report. Companies with the clause have to report a cyber breach or incident within 72 hours of its occurring. And you have to provide considerable information to DoD along with that report. And you have to make yourself accessible to DoD if it wants to do forensics. Well, if you file an incident report after a ransomware, you might have to tell DoD that you no longer have access to information on the system because you've been locked out. You might have to tell DoD that information which is CUI has been stolen by a party unknown. You might even have to tell DoD that the ransomware attacker has threatened to put it on the dark web and to sell it. All of those things are events which will interest DoD, possibly the FBI as well. And DoD has the right to conduct an impact analysis so that it can be informed of the damage done to its mission capabilities by the loss of information. And if the DoD does that impact assessment and does an inquiry after you report a ransomware incident, there are many genuine risks if they find that you have not complied with 172 and have not done the NIST 800-171 requirements. Earlier this year, DoD put out a memorandum that stressed that contracting officers should consider what means they can take contractually if they find that there is a failure to have or make progress on a plan to implement the 171 requirements. And that DoD memoranda, the department said that remedies for a breach include withholding progress payments, foregoing remaining contract actions, and potentially terminating the contract. Moreover, in a situation where you might have submitted an optimistic SPRS score and you had nothing behind it, and if you then suffer a breach, you could be looking at worse consequences. It is possible that an inspector general would do an investigation, or the Defense Criminal Investigative Service. It is possible that you would come to the attention of a U.S. attorney, and it is possible that there would be examination of a case that could be brought against you for civil false claims, for making representations as to your cyber compliance, which you knowingly did not satisfy. Now, do these things happen in the ordinary course? Not too often. Can they happen? Absolutely. And just last year, DoD announced a big new civil cyber fraud initiative. And while its targets may largely be bigger companies, there is no acquiescence within the department or within the Department of Justice to smaller and medium-sized businesses knowingly avoiding their cyber compliance requirements.
So Bob, the provisions that of DFARS 7019-20 are about to become final in December 2022, which provide government and DoD with additional oversight. Could you highlight some of the actions both DoD and I'm also now going to introduce primes are taking up to step up supplier enforcement of NIST 800-171?
So just to set the record straight, 19 and 20 have been in effect since December of 2020. They are in play now. I know everybody's heard that CMMC 2.0 has been postponed, and maybe the new regulations won't be effective until next summer. But in the meantime, 7012 and 7019 and 7020 are definitely in place. And there's also another requirement in the FAR that obligates contracting officers to verify that these clauses are included, not just in the primes, but there's also obligations to confirm that there's been sufficient flow down. 19 and 20 are quite important. They both tell you that you have to do an assessment using this methodology and submit your score. And the only way to do the assessment in accordance with the methodology is to have a system security plan. And the only way that you're going to have a system security plan that makes any sense is for you first to do an inventory to understand where you have CUI that you need to protect. Preparing a system security plan is not something that can be done automatically or divested to third parties entirely. While you can get a lot of help from third parties, and there are many external service providers such as Prevail that can provide a great deal of help to you. I mean, ultimately, the responsibility not just to say what you're doing, but do what you say, resides with the company. A smart move for many companies is to look for the right combination of third-party external service providers so that they can get help to meet the requirements and have to invent as little as possible. Interestingly, in the last 3 or 4 months, the Defense Contract Management Agency has started to check whether the scores submitted to SIPRs by smaller and medium-sized companies are valid. They have something called a medium assessment right that is in the 7020 clause. And they describe that as being a combination of trust and examination. Well, the examination in a medium assessment could be the DIPCAC, the Defense Industrial Base Cyber Security Assurance Center, that DIPCAC will call a smaller or medium-sized company. They will know what your SIPR's score is. They will then ask to see the system security plan that supports it. They will want to discuss with you how you came to the figure of when you will close the gaps. And DCMA officials have said in sessions that I've been speaking with them at, they have said that it is not a good thing for a company to have put in a high score on their self-assessment, and then for DCMA to find out that there is no system security plan, the score is unsupported, and there is no plan to actually close any gaps, which may not even be known. If that situation happens to you, the risk of further DoD investigation and potentially referral to civil or criminal authority cannot be dismissed.
So Bob, if we summarize the guidance that you provided on compliance being introduced, if you are suffering a ransomware attack, DFARS provisions being introduced, the fact that 800-171 is currently the law as it applies to defense contractors, what would your guidance be in summary to defense contractors on the timing of when they should be thinking about implementing NIST 800-171?
Well, my guidance is to try to find an appropriate balance between the measures that you should prioritize that will protect you against ransomware attacks and the similar or same measures and others that you should undertake to be sure that you are fully compliant with 171, and to be sure that you are ready for CMMC 2.0 when it comes into effect, perhaps next summer. In some of my recent work, I've tried to stress to companies that there is a relationship between protecting the enterprise, that is security, and compliance. Sometimes the priority ought to be given to things that will best secure your information and your information system so that you're a less attractive target to a ransomware criminal. Also, if you have strong defenses or well-encrypted information, it can make it less interesting, or the ransomware actor may not be able to sell your data or get any use from it if they are unable to unencrypt it. In addition, it's very important for enterprises to have good measures and to practice their recovery from ransomware attack. And again, if you have secure information that is encrypted, which is stored off-site, gives you a better chance of recovery quickly. And that's so important because often, ransomware attacks can do terrible damage to your continuity of operations. They also can call upon you to spend a lot of money on lawyers and specialists, and quite a bit of money on forensics, and you may have to pay a ransomware bounty. Well, that's a lot for most businesses. And I do know of very small businesses that have been attacked and suffered crippling financial consequences. And that's where a third component comes in, and that's cyber insurance. You want it. You want cyber insurance as soon as you can get it to protect your enterprise against a successful ransomware attack. But in order to get that cyber insurance, you're going to have to pass their due diligence. And that due diligence on the part of the insurers is getting pretty aggressive. They now want to know what you are doing to protect your information and information systems. And you will find that if you do a good job to comply with 7012, if you in fact can show that you satisfy most or better all of 171, if you have taken other measures to reinforce your defenses and improve your resilience, all of those things will help you qualify for insurance, will make the insurance more affordable, will increase the coverage amount that you can afford, and will give you a better chance of keeping that insurance as the market tightens. So I see all these things coming together. But to answer your question, just a phrase, I think it's important for every business, no matter where you are in the supply chain, whether you have CUI or not, to take measures now and continuously to satisfy compliance obligations and to improve your security, informed by the constant change in the threat and environment and change in our knowledge of vulnerabilities. This is not a one-time proposition. This is a continuous obligation that, regrettably, every company has to face and endure.
So, Bob, if the contractors were thinking, well, CMMC is coming, March of next year, it's also got the same 110 controls. Maybe I should just defer, doing anything about NIST 800-171 till perhaps next year or the following year. Would that be a prudent decision to make?
Well, I don't think so. I mean, first, you have to submit the SPRS score, CPRS score. And that CPRS score is done in accordance with DoD assessment methodology that's built around 171. And if you submit something that's false and then an event goes wrong, or you get subject to this DIPCAC medium assessment, you got contractual and potentially other legal problems. But also, I mean, the truth is that for many companies, satisfying 171 is going to be a journey. And those who think that it can be done in a matter of a few months, I believe, are wrong. It is better to start early. Perhaps you can set some priorities. Perhaps you can phase your activities so that you can afford them. But I never counsel a company to do nothing now and simply wait until it must do something. First, because you'll be vulnerable during the interval to a ransomware attack, and they happen all the time. It's a plague. Second, you are exposed to an assertion by DoD that you're taking contracts under false pretenses and failing to fulfill explicit obligations. You don't want that. And there are kind of combined reasons. Compliance is important for its own sake, but here compliance with 172 and NIST 171, those are things that help improve your security. And there are powerful business reasons to have and to sustain improved enterprise security.
So Bob, my final question is, the SPRS score that contractors have to submit, the DoD is certainly looking at it, but there's also significance for your own competitive stance vis-a-vis, being participant in a prime's contract. Could you comment on why the SPRS score matters to a prime contractor as well?
Right. Well, DoD has its most contractual leverage over prime contractors. And prime contractors can be liable if there is an information security breach in their supply chain. Moreover, if it were a ransomware attack, they could even lose the access to a valued subcontractor for some period of time or forever. I do represent and advise a pretty significant number of large DoD contractors in different mission areas. Every one of them is paying increased attention to what they can do to have higher assurance in the cyber and supply chain security of their vendors. They are asking more questions, requiring more tests, seeking means to show that you are sufficiently secure that they will be in compliance with their obligations and they will have lesser cyber risk by including you in their supply chain. It is a competitive advantage for companies to have done a good job and even had an assessment that they can show to a prime. It really counts. When CMMC 2.0 is in place, when you get an assessment demand in an RFP or contract, well, yeah, then you're going to have this formal assessment. But in the meantime, primes are not waiting around until then to assess and evaluate the security of their suppliers. It is a huge priority across the higher tiers of the defense supply chain to do business with companies that are more secure and can show it.
Well, thank you very much, Bob. These have been very helpful guidances, if I could call it incorrect English, but nonetheless, where you have guided a small to medium contractor on their obligations under existing DFARS, the necessity of acting on implementing NIST 800-171, and some pragmatic aspects for them to consider in protecting their information. We appreciate, as always, your participation and comments and look forward to the next in our series of conversations. So thank you.
Thank you very much.